Right now, while you're watching this, coffee is being brewed somewhere, billions of cups every day, and the majority of the money from that coffee passes through a country where not a single coffee tree grows. Not one. By the end of this video, you'll understand why that's not an accident and why it matters to you personally. Let's start with a number. By some estimates, between 60 and 70% of all global coffee trade, not the harvest, but the trade itself, flows through companies registered in Switzerland. The country ranks second in the world for coffee exports, right behind Brazil. Yet Switzerland has no tropical climate, no plantations, no farmers with machetes. Just offices, banks, and one legal rule that almost nobody knows about. Today we're going to break down 4 things. First, how Switzerland ended up at the center of the coffee world. Second, who actually makes money from your morning cup? Third, the dark side of this system that major brands never talk about. And fourth, why this arrangement isn't going to change anytime soon.
To understand Switzerland, you need to understand one phrase: substantial transformation. It's a principle of international trade law. Sounds boring. The consequences are enormous. The rule says a product takes on the origin of the country where it underwent its key processing. In the case of coffee, that's roasting. A green bean from Ethiopia arrives in Switzerland. It gets roasted, and now it's Swiss coffee, stamped Made in Switzerland, eligible to be exported under Switzerland's trade agreements. Customs authorities worldwide unanimously agreed roasting counts as a serious enough transformation. That decision turned Switzerland into a coffee superpower. But roasting is only part of the story, because most of the money in the coffee chain isn't made on roasting, it's made on trading raw beans. And that's where Switzerland is the undisputed center of the world. Around Lake Geneva and in the canton of Zug, an ecosystem has formed that industry insiders call Coffee Valley.
6 of the world's largest raw coffee traders are based here. Financial structures that finance harvests before a single seed is sown operate here. Crop failure risks are insured here. Futures contracts on coffee that doesn't yet exist are signed here. And this is also where Nestlé, home to Nespresso and Nescafé, is headquartered. The company that sells more coffee than anyone else in the world is based in Vevey, a small town on the shore of Lake Geneva. Every single Nespresso capsule sold anywhere in the world is produced in 3 factories in Switzerland. This is not a coincidence. This is infrastructure built over decades. Tax incentives, a stable franc, banking secrecy, neutrality. Switzerland created conditions where money flows in on its own, and coffee is just one example. Gold, oil, and grain are traded here too. So when you buy a bag of coffee at the supermarket, there's a good chance the profit from that transaction ended up in an account in Geneva or Zug, even if the packaging says Ethiopia or Colombia.
Now, the other side of this system. Ethiopia, the birthplace of coffee. Literally, this is where, according to legend, a shepherd named Kaldi noticed his goats wouldn't sleep after eating berries from a certain bush. The 9th century, the province of Kaffa. That's where the word coffee itself comes from. Today in Ethiopia, coffee is the backbone of the economy. About 30 to 35% of the country's entire foreign currency earnings. Roughly 15 million people depend on the industry, directly or indirectly. The country is one of the 5 largest coffee producers in the world. But the average Ethiopian coffee farmer earns around $900 a year. Women working in the warehouses, about $20 a month. Meanwhile, in a coffee shop in New York or Amsterdam, a cup made from Ethiopian beans costs $4 to $7. How does that happen? The mechanism is simple. The farmer sells fresh cherries at a local market in local currency. A trader buys up the batches, exports the beans, now priced in dollars. The trader is typically registered in Switzerland or trades through a Swiss platform. An importer in Europe or the US sells it to a roaster. The roaster builds a brand. The brand sells to the end consumer at a markup of several 100%. At every step, value is added, but it's added not where the bean was grown. Researchers have documented this. Even when the world market price rises, that doesn't always translate to higher income for the farmer, because between the farmer and the market, there are several layers of intermediaries, and each one takes their cut. Here's the paradox. Ethiopia can't afford to drink its own coffee. The finest varieties, Yirgacheffe, Sidamo, Harar, are exported.
Because the country needs hard currency, and what's left behind is sold domestically. And there's one more thing almost nobody knows. In 2006, Ethiopia tried to trademark its finest varieties, Sidamo, Harar, Yirgacheffe, to control who uses those names and how, to collect royalties. Major corporations pushed back to block that registration. Eventually, after a public scandal, an agreement was signed. But the episode revealed something. The system is built so that value stays with those who trade, not those who grow. And now, the strangest part. Switzerland is the second largest coffee exporter in the world, behind Brazil, the planet's largest coffee producer. Think about that again. Brazil, millions of hectares of plantations, 30% of the global harvest, millions of workers. Switzerland, 8.5 million people, mountains, cows, and banks. And they're in the same league for coffee exports. How? Because Switzerland doesn't export coffee as a product. It exports coffee as a financial instrument. Here's how it works in practice. A trader registered in Zug signs a contract to buy a harvest in Vietnam, 6 months before it's picked. They hedge that contract on the futures market, in London or New York, through a Swiss bank. The beans physically travel from Ho Chi Minh City straight to Hamburg. They never cross the Swiss border. But the entire financial transaction runs through Geneva. The profit settles in Switzerland.
This is called transit trade, and it accounts for the bulk of that 60 to 70%. Switzerland isn't a warehouse. It's a processing center for money flows. And then there's one more level. 70% of all automatic coffee machines sold worldwide are made in Switzerland. Coffee machines, capsule systems, professional bar equipment. Switzerland earns on the bean, on trading the bean, on roasting the bean, and on the machines that turn the bean into a drink. It's vertical integration, invisible from the outside. Because from the outside, it just looks like coffee from Ethiopia or Italian-style espresso. Can this system be changed? Yes, but slowly. Switzerland built its position over decades. Tax climate, political neutrality, banking infrastructure, legal predictability. Companies don't relocate there because they love the cheese. They relocate because it's safer to hold money there and easier to run international trade. This structural advantage isn't stolen or illegal. It was built deliberately, over generations. Change is happening, but from a different direction. Fair trade certification, an attempt to guarantee farmers a minimum price. Direct trade programs, where the roaster pays the farmer directly, cutting out the middlemen. The specialty coffee movement, which creates value specifically around the origin of the bean. The consumer pays more, and some of that sum flows back to where the bean was grown, but it's a drop in the ocean. Because specialty coffee accounts for a small fraction of the market, the bulk of trade still runs through standard commodity contracts.
And the bulk of the profit is still in Geneva. What's interesting is something else. The Swiss themselves are increasingly aware of this paradox. A country that drinks nearly 8 kilograms of coffee per person per year, one of the highest rates in the world, is starting to ask, is this fair? Organic and fair trade products in Switzerland are growing faster than the European average. Consumers are paying more, consciously. But the trading system changes far more slowly than tastes in coffee shops. Here is the central paradox of this story. A country that has never grown a single coffee bean became the architect of the entire global coffee economy. A country with no soil, no climate, no tradition of growing coffee, took second place in the world for exporting it. And it did this completely legally. No deception, no military conquest, no monopoly. Simply by building the right rules. This is what actually determines who gets rich in the global economy. Not the one who produces, but the one who controls the flows. Oil is extracted in Nigeria and Saudi Arabia, but pricing happens in London and New York. Gold is mined in South Africa, but traded in Zurich. Coffee is grown in Ethiopia and Vietnam, but the money is counted in Geneva. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the architecture of global trade. And it was built, not in secret, but openly, by those who understood. What matters is not what you make with your hands, but where you stand in the chain. Next time you drink a cup of coffee, think about that. In your cup is a story about power, logistics, law,
poverty, and who wrote the rules of this game. If you've made it to this moment, you now know more about the global economy than most people around you.